today for our webinar, Precision and Personalization, Harnessing the Power of Identity Graphs. I will be passing the time over to our speakers in just a moment, but before I do want to acknowledge that we had a slight change in our speaker lineup. And so I want to just acknowledge that Mark Fidelli was not able to join us today, and thank Kumar Rathnam, who stepped in. Gentlemen, I'll pass it over to you to do your introductions and talk through the agenda. Kumar, let's start with you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm sitting in for Mark Fennelly. I'm Kumar Rathnam. I'm the Senior Vice President of Product at DNB for our sales and marketing solutions, as well as our digital audience business. I'm very excited to be here. It's not that I didn't want Mark to be here, but Mark had to go on his vacation. It was planned, and we work closely, so I'm here. I'm also excited, and I said, well, we are doing this webinar, and Chris Schrader, with Chris Schrader, I said, sure, it's going to be our usual one-on-one conversation. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. In terms of my background, I have been in technology and data, media. That's been my experience, and lived in 3 other countries. Been in the US since 2010. So the last 10 years I've been into building data products, working closely with Fortune 5000 companies. Very excited in terms of what's happening in the data space. It's never a dull moment at the same time. With AI, that's my first use of AI. The importance of data is even more prominent and in the spotlight. So very excited to be in this space and working with our customers and the team to build the data products. And with that, I will hand it over to Chris. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kumar, and thanks for stepping in, of course. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Schrader. I am a principal product manager within Dun & Bradstreet, where I have responsibilities around our identity and digital audience products. My background in both B2B data and in marketing includes work on the brand side. On the agency side, I have had sourcing responsibilities and data strategy responsibilities across a number of industries, including retail, the federal government space, hospitality, and of course, IT. So I'm looking forward to sharing my perspective with you all today. And again, we appreciate your time. So with that, why don't we get through what we're going to talk through today in terms of the agenda now that we have introductions out of the way. We're going to start with just a basic understanding of developing trends we see, market dynamics we see. We're going to set a foundational sort of definitional level of what an identity graph is or can be, and then get into the specifics about how it can help activate first-party data, strategies to boost things like relevance or engagement. And of course, we're all interested in improving ROI, and an identity graph can certainly help from a targeting perspective in that case. We'll talk through how identity resolution enhances performance, but with the challenge of also staying compliant. Throughout, we'll mention a couple of real-world insights, maybe a couple of case studies, and of course, the proven results that we're seeing in the marketplace. We'll close, as Emily suggested, with some Q&A, some closing remarks. And with that, why don't we get right into the developing market trends we're seeing, and I'll hand it back to Kumar.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So in terms of trend, what is this evolution has been happening for a while now. When we talk about personalization is it's done at scale very effectively on the consumer side, with some exception. And the B2B side, it's always been a challenge. But in terms of the buyer's expectation on the B2B side, it's been growing up in terms of the personalization, the content that resonates with the problem that the buyer is trying to solve, right? The B2B buyer. And And that expectation has gone up because lately the availability, the explosion of data, the technology that can actually tie the content together based on the data, and the maturity in the buying stages, orchestration, all of that, the expectation is only going up. So the trend is like on the higher side. And with the invent of this whole AI based content, now the content production is being accelerated. There's some economy of scale. So that only basically the expectation is going up on the personalized experience for the B2B buyer. As I said, like, with AI, there's a data aspect to it, and then there is a content aspect to it, right? So because content production is where it's pretty much heavy, there's a lot of heavy lifting there. There's investment there. But if you want to do hyper personalization, you need to have like insights into your data and segments in your audience where you are able to marry it to the right content. The more variations of the content and the ability to tie it to a segment, which is where it's going to resonate with the buyer, right? In terms of the expectation, where they are in the buyer's journey. The other trend that more it's been like highlighted is the B2B space. The e-commerce is basically going up, and the trend is going up. And that's interesting because uh, prior to COVID, like, so like there is a certain value below, that when there is a product value goes above a certain level, then it's all like, so you got to have a direct interaction, and it's not e-commerce basically. But now that values keep going up. People signing up of a piece of software that's a higher value. They take the demo, trial, the entire experience, and then they just onboard it. They just put it on the card. Um, so that trend is also in line with what is happening in terms of the buyer's experience, not only at the engagement level, at the pre-sales level, even at the sale level. The e-commerce trend is going up. So this is all like coming down to data, what we know about the decision maker, the buyer. And then the ability to then, like, serve them before sale and post sale as well. So the trends are moving towards that. These are interesting trends, and we have the sources there. You guys can check it out. So with that, we go to the next slide.
Yeah, so
What is
let's
the
talk. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what an identity graph even is. Obviously, everyone here knows it's one of the most powerful tools you can have from a modern B2B marketing standpoint. But there's a tendency, in my mind anyway, to kind of generally describe an ID graph as just a ton of data that's meshed together or mapped together. And while that's technically true of just about any database, I think the distinction is in the sort of dynamic nature of what an identity graph is able to do from a use case standpoint, right? So at its core, an identity graph is a dynamic database that connects all of the identifiers associated with an individual, right? So both online and offline into a single persistent person-based profile. Now that's the goal, right? So think email addresses, device IDs, cookies, CRM, even event-driven indicators like a trade show record or a past purchase. So instead of fragmented data points, you get a unified view of your prospect or your customer. Now, some ID graphs contain what we consider to be traditional business persona elements, while others are more consumer-oriented. And in some identity graphs, those two things can be linked together, where your business persona and your consumer persona and all of the profile attributes that can be known about either one of those sides can be crosswalked or linked to create this B2B to B2B to C view, rather. So once those profiles are built, obviously you can layer in all kinds of signals and other data elements, right? So traditional job title things, behavioral data, demographics, psychographics, all of which can be used to sort of enrich those profiles. And that's where, obviously, from a marketing standpoint, it gets extremely exciting because identity graphs then power that sort of precise, already privacy compliant activation channels or activation opportunities through all of that layered data, right? So whether you're targeting through email or LinkedIn or traditional direct mail or new avenues like CTV, social, even audio, that's where those connections, those ID graph connected data elements can help activate that. So instead of guessing what's behind a record in your traditional database where you may have partial information, or maybe somebody who attended one of your events only gave their Yahoo address. This, through an ID graph, you can start to fill in more and more of those profile views and create full persona, either business or consumer. So personalization is, of course, the goal of many marketers. Kumar mentioned earlier the trend we're seeing in terms of the buyer journey. That's the expectation that has shifted, right? So from a buyer's perspective, the expectation is that companies that are marketing to them will message them in relevant ways. They will meet them with content that matters to them, becoming more and more like what we would expect from a B2C standpoint, where those campaigns are fueled by all of the knowledge that's available from a consumer perspective. That has blended into the expectation of the B2B buyer's expectation. Now, this is complicated, obviously, by things like the deprecation of certain signals or new signals that have come to bear. And obviously, privacy is another challenge. Now, from a kind of what's broken standpoint or what's been a challenge, first-party data, which is sort of the inroad for a lot of marketers into an ID graph, is often siloed or certainly underutilized, but maybe incomplete, right? It might be sitting in separate databases. You might not know all of the things that you have in-house from a first-party standpoint, and that's a challenge to overcome. And like I mentioned before, we have identifiers that go through cyclical times, right? The maybe deprecation of the cookie, maybe not deprecation of the cookie. MAIDs is a tough one to navigate as well from a volume and accuracy standpoint. And what this leads to are sort of fragmented personas where you don't necessarily see end-to-end all of the ways that your consumer or your customer rather, or your prospect may or may not have interacted with your product or service. So what's needed? What can be enabled by an identity graph? What's needed is that unification, that person-based profile that applies that profile across as many devices as possible, across all of their roles, into as many channels as possible. And it needs to be built for scale, obviously compliance, but it needs to have that flexibility to address the unknowns, what's coming next from a signal, from an intelligence standpoint, from a new platform standpoint, and from a new ID standpoint. So end to end, you have to address personalization, which is that market force Kumar mentioned earlier. You have to start to overcome the challenges that are true for a lot of enterprise marketers in terms of their own first-party data. And then you need that sort of framework, that flexible framework that an identity graph solution can provide to help you navigate and move forward.
Let's talk about behind the scene, right? So how does the graph work? And I want to add to what Chris mentioned in terms of the different identities. And what we have seen in the past more is like you have a business graph, and then there is consumer graph. So lately, the need for the business and consumer graph to come together is what we are talking about here, right? So that's the differentiator here, the ability to bring those business and individual person or a consumer and link it together. You're able to get a complete view, both from a business side as well as consumer side. There are various ways, but then we have this is a simplified workflow that you can think of, right? You can take your like this is a one way of looking at it. You can take your data, customer data, whether it's sitting in your CRM, clean room, data lake, it doesn't matter where it is. You take that, and it could have a combination of both a consumer data or a business professional contact data. It doesn't matter, because the beauty of this data is like this has a link to both, right? You have both. A lot of times when you're trying to resolve to a data set, your data to another data set, to append missing records, to enrich. The problem you'll run into is like either you're trying to match it against a consumer data set or a business data set. Um, but the key thing here is you need to be able to resolve to the graph data set that basically that provides that linkage, so your end resolution goes up. So you take your data and you can match it against this graph data. As I said, like, it overcomes the problem of matching against to one side of the data set. Instead, now you're able to do it on both ends where you get the highest resolution, and then all the insights, then you can actually add to it the signal data, whether at the business level or at an individual level, depending on whether you're looking for a B2B campaign or a consumer campaign. You're able to get all these inside. And when it comes to activation is depending on the channel, you would need different IDs. And Chris was talking about those different IDs, right? If you are taking those traditional channels of like email, then you are looking at the PII, right? You're looking at the email address. We're looking at outbound in terms of a snail mail. You need the postal. So now you're looking at like you need the address details for it. And then when it comes to those digital channels, right? Whether you're talking about social, then you need mail and hashed emails and phone numbers. Now you can see how from an identity of a business to a contact, a decision maker that you're trying to reach, your ability to reach on these channels exponentially goes up, because now you have all those other identifiers tied to that individual, to that business. And whether you're talking about programmatic media, same thing. Then it gets into the cookie territory, cookie, maids, IP address. So that's the beauty of this. You're not only able to just enrich and complete your data set, get the signals, segment, you're able to get the maximum reach with precision into all the channels. So the effort and the investment that went into the first part of the equation of your first party data basically produces the best ROI where you actually want in terms of the engagement, and then drive to back to getting those insights into your database in terms of signal.
Yeah, and if I could add, Kumar,
Yep.
I think any direct marketer is always looking for test-worthy ideas, right? Ideas, I should say, where an identity graph can power so many of those, whether it's new segments powered by intelligence that you didn't know, or perspective that you didn't have because you didn't have the consumer persona, or vice versa, or new channels for activation. But you mentioned, you hit it on the head with the analytics component, right? You're getting insights that you didn't have access to before, and all of those sort of test-worthy ideas rather, are very quickly put into action via an identity graph, and you can learn more about ways to potentially expand your TAM, expand obviously your segmentation strategy, and just more effectively direct market to your prospects. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk privacy. I don't think I need to convince anyone here that privacy is critical, and trust is not just a value, but it's truly a competitive advantage, or at least it can be. When it comes to data and identity, trust has to be earned, obviously, and you do that from my perspective, with privacy-first strategies, right, that are built to scale. The strongest identity graphs are designed with compliance really at their core, right? So to help marketers use data the right way, it can be a little daunting when you're crossing over to business elements or data signals that you haven't had before, and you are potentially dealing with PII or just data types that you haven't had in your in your mix before, and it's just a lot to manage, right? So there are evolving privacy regulations that change at the market and state level, and certainly by data type, and all of that is that it needs to be managed from a compliance standpoint. It needs to be baked into your identity graph solutions. One of those things I just want to dig into a little bit is the sort of third-party data sourcing component of privacy and compliance. All graph solutions, all of your existing data sets, you're probably managing multiple vendors, multiple data assets within your own lake. You are dealing with aggregators, and it's important to understand not just what that data represents, but how it was originally sourced. How was it managed from a compliance, from an opt-in standpoint? How is it updated? How frequently, and what are the actual methodologies of that update process? These are all very tough questions, but they're fair, and your data provider's answers will be telling. And the reason why it's important to ask those questions is to give you that confidence you need to sort of endeavor into new and potentially daunting data platforms or data initiatives that are fueled by an identity graph. Because if you don't have that confidence, if you can't rely on your third-party sources, your partners in these initiatives from a compliance standpoint, it becomes a snowball of a challenge. Now, the last point I want to make on privacy is that it's not just the marketing organization or the data science organization that has or plays a role in privacy and compliance. Everyone within the organization, ideally, an identity graph touches various aspects of your business, whether it's from a campaigning standpoint, from a sales standpoint, from an ABM standpoint, certainly from an analytics standpoint. Everyone needs to understand that privacy is a company-wide initiative, and they are your stakeholders, and they need to be as informed of how much emphasis your data initiatives put on privacy and what their role is in terms of emphasizing their own responsibilities within the context of privacy. So it's obviously a shared responsibility. It's yours to lead, but it's your organizations to adopt and adhere to. And it's important for ID graphs in particular, but really for all of your data initiatives to have that privacy baked in and to have a roadmap that will continue to manage those challenges.
Yeah, Chris, that's very well said. I would add to that, equally as you work with your data partner, you want to have that same level of maturity and due diligence when it comes to how the data is managed in compliance with the privacy regulation, because you're not only touching the business and contact data, you get into the consumer, and then you are also getting into the digital identity space. The privacy compliance varies by itself for each segment or the elements of data. And then when you're stitching it together, and that actually elevates and complicates it. So having a deep knowledge and expertise with the data partner who can actually advise you on these is also critically important. And we see that as the biggest value add, because when it's not done right, it probably can be damaging.
That's right. So we have a few poll questions for the audience, and we'd love for your participation in these just from a conversational standpoint. The first one is, how would you describe your organization's current identity resolution strategy? Is it fragmented? Is it emerging? Is it established? Or are you activating at scale? Are you here to brag about how well you're doing? Let us know, and we should see the audience poll results here in a couple of seconds. Great. So it looks like I would say, this is a not unexpected result. We have folks that are probably dipping their toe into identity resolution waters, and a handful maybe activating at scale, true pros at this. But this is an emergent solution that has companies that are obviously interested in learning how it could potentially address their needs. So this is a pretty expected curve, I would say.
Yeah. And there's opportunity for everyone, right? Even with the established to on segment, where it's ever changing, evolving, right? And those IDs coming in, ability to stitch it and then scale even further. But I think that trends like the poll pretty much reflects what we also see in the market. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. So next, I think we're going to get into a couple of slides that are related. Kumar will tackle the first one, but we're going to talk about this concept of the ideal person profile, the IPP.
Yeah. And we briefly talked about it in the beginning,
We
and
did.
I would have started off with this, right? So because we got to get grounded, and I touched on this, on what is an ideal person profile, because there's ideal customer profile, there's many acronyms. And in a simplest form, as I already mentioned, right, you see the same person in two different roles. So there are data collected and organized in two different ways. In a business context, business by itself is an entity. So if you think about business, um, we are done on Bradstreet. Every business, we every business at a location level, we give an ID. It's called a DUNS number, right? And we manage that at the location level, and then there is an element of how that business is represented in the market. That slightly varies as well. Similar way, and then like all those employees or who works for that company, those are individuals, and they wear the professional hat, and then you have all those title, their professional contact details, the areas of responsibility or their decision maker, all that you have that profile of that individual, and then the same person, like outside of the work hours, they were a consumer persona, right? And there are elements and ID given to them in the consumer world, and there's a lot of insights. You get on from one to the other, except like they're collected and managed separately. The opportunity with the graph itself is creating that person profile, putting that person in the middle, and then say, here is all the IDs that represent this person. And by bringing those IDs together and linking it with that professional insights, now you are able to truly get an insight into this person, what is their personal profile looks like and professional profile looks like. And that opens up the opportunity, depending on whether you're doing a consumer campaign or a B2B campaign, your ability to get insights and segment and reach, as well as ability to reach that person, um, exponentially goes high. That's what I meant. So basically, you can still manage them separately. The graph provides that ability to bring it together um, in a virtual way, because you're not physically bringing the data together. The graph provides that bridge for you to get that true view, whether you are looking to get that insight through getting the data from a third-party partner, data partner, from one to another, or you do have both because you're a company who have business consumers and business product as well as consumer products. So you have a consumer base on both. This provides the ability to truly get a view of your customer base across the board. So that's what we call as an ideal person profile. I don't know, Chris, do you want to add anything to it?
Well, I think we can go to the next slide. There's a little bit different
Yeah,
visualization
there
of
you go.
this. So, I think everybody's familiar with the left side of this view here, where these are traditional, typical B2B attributes that you might have at a contact level. You may not have them all in one database, or maybe you do have it organized in that sort of traditional structured way. But if you start to look to the right here, and we can talk about what an IPP can start to uncover, right? So it's things like personal attributes. These are, of course, exposed raw for the purposes of this presentation. But from a compliance standpoint, that email would likely be in hashed form for personal PII. But you can start to see how it expands, not just from a contact information, but a work history standpoint. How long have they been with their company? What were their previous roles? And then you start to uncover things like intent, affinity, certainly their demographics, but maybe their purchasing history, all of the digital identifiers that could be put into actionable campaign. All of those start to fill out what an IPP might look like. Now, realistically, does this happen magically overnight? No, it does not. It matures over time as more of these signals, more of these attributes are collected at an individual level. But what this identity graph IPP concept allows is for you to, in an organized way, pull all of those together at the individual level, at the persona level, to make them actionable. So instead of siloed information from a business standpoint, from a traditional firmographic standpoint, from a contact standpoint, and all of the things that you can know about that particular person, that's what the identity graph uncovers from a potential standpoint. And I would just say, at the end of the day, we can all have as much information about a prospect from a business standpoint, whether or not they utilize a certain technology, what their past purchasing history is as a company, what their past actions have been as they relate to your product or your industry. But at the end of the day, you are ultimately selling to a person. A person is going to make that decision. And I think that's where it ties it back to this market force that we're seeing, which is that expectation that the buyer journey can be influenced in a way that is more like a consumer-oriented campaign, where you are meeting them where they are with engaging materials that are going to be meaningful for their particular purview.
Yeah. So what is the real value? Why would we do that? I think we spoke about it, and these are pretty, this provides clarity in terms of, like, where you can actually get value out of this investment and initiative. Why do you have to do all this, right? Um, the benefit of bridging the data set together, get all of that, so you can do smarter segmentation, right? And because now you have more insights which you didn't have before because of the other signals that you could get. And that signal can be your own first-party data, your own engagement touch points, or the signals that you actually get from third-party data providers like ourselves. But now you have the ability to connect it, stitch it to your data, right? Your customer data, your prospect data. And that enables smarter segmentation. The targeting aspect of it as well, I spoke about it. Like, if I always give this example. If you're a B2B marketer, trying to reach D&B decision maker, trying to sell a SaaS solution, and trying to, within that decision maker, if I am one of those key decision makers, you have all of my information, but your ability to reach me is limited to the data that you have. Typically in the B2B scenario is going to be like, yes, you have Kumar, head of product, done on Bradstreet, and you may have my kumar@dnb.com as an email address, right? And so if you're trying to reach me, either programmatically or through LinkedIn and all those channels, you may not find me, right, with that identity that you have. And that's exactly where the graph comes into play. And it provides that extension, that reach, to say, like, well, that's kumar@dnb.com is actually also is kumar@gmail. And now you are able to find me on LinkedIn, right? That the targeting and accurately, now you're not doing a siloed LinkedIn campaign. You're actually working off of the source of truth from your data set. You're able to do that. And then same thing you extend to, but also kumar@yahoo.com, then you can find me on social or programmatic. And because that kumar@yahoo.com, then you are able to, the graph provides the digital identifiers extension as well. So you are able to target. So that the targeting become feasible at scale. The omni-channel, as I was talking about, like, from your data, that ability to working off the single source of truth to across all channels, you're working off of the same data. Because in a traditional setting, what you will do is you got to go to every single channel and have to build a segment separately, and then, like, you're doing targeting, which may not tie exactly back to your data source, right? And then finally, closing the loop, when you're trying to measure, the engagement may happen using different IDs. And your ability to bring that and then tie it back to a campaign is limited without the graph, and the graph enables that. And this graph, again, you can have it in-house, you can actually externally, but this is where the real value is. If you're a marketer, the way you think about it is like, where am I going to get value out of this investment? This is where you're going to get out of it.
So that brings us to our second poll question. If you could solve one of these challenges today, which would have the biggest impact for your organization? So reaching the right person across platforms, scaling personalization without increasing spend, connecting customer journeys across devices and roles, measuring performance at the person level, or staying compliant while using data more intelligently. Great. So thank you again for your participation in that poll. Looks like the majority would see the benefit of connecting customer journeys across devices and roles. That's perfect use case for an ID graph. So again, thank you so much.
And that's the biggest challenge, right? It's
Yep.
ties exactly to the challenge. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So moving to just a few industry examples and use cases, I will, in the interest of time, go very quickly through this next slide, and we'll get into then some industry-specific examples. So what does growth potentially look like when an identity graph is part of your fuel? We have the ability to really not eliminate, of course, you're never going to eliminate all waste, but you will significantly duplicate things like duplicate personas within your contact universe, mismatched IDs. If you can reduce the prevalence of those types of very common data errors, you are, obviously more precisely targeting who you want to target, but there's less waste, and obviously that also fuels much better, much tighter attribution post-campaign. Speaking of campaigns, from a launch standpoint, an ID graph, because they are designed to already be, activation ready within multiple platforms, within multiple use cases, that gives you the ability really to go from a weeks-long process to one that's closer to days long. And the best identity graphs are constantly refueling the data types and the efficiencies in terms of making that data not just compliance ready, obviously, but activation ready. And then we've talked a lot about the smarter personalization at scale that ID graphs enable, and that's just a huge part of what growth could look like when you have already sort of plateaued from a reach out standpoint to your prospect or customer universe. An ID graph can uncover new sort of test-worthy paths that can fuel more growth. So with that, let's go right into a few examples of ID graph use cases within certain verticals. Kumar, if you wanted to take the first shot here, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should have mentioned it during the introduction as itself, is like Chris is leading the product effort, and he's way closer to this product and capabilities, and he talks to customers every other day, and he's closer to these use cases, so he can speak more. And you guys should get in touch with him to get like thought leadership ideas, like depending on where you are in the journey. He can share his perspective on what he has seen as well. So I'll pick one, like in the B2B space. What I have seen is if you're, let's say you're a tech, like you're a tech company, you have solution for business as well as consumers. That means your customer base has both business customers as well as consumer customer. The opportunity that we have seen, like customers leveraging this kind of data set, is basically ability to stitch that together, both those data set, and get a complete view of your customer base. And that's because your customer base, now you have the ability to target them on both sides of the equation, because they are opted in that's your customer. And they get insights, reach, signal, and able to even like drive the traffic or route the traffic in different direction, depending on which side of the equation that individual or the person is coming from, whether from a consumer perspective or a business perspective. We have seen this segment has benefited the most. Chris, you have another example?
Yeah, I would pick retail and specifically the types of retail organizations that rely on customer loyalty. Companies like Dunkin' Brands or Starbucks, and certainly this is applicable to the hospitality and travel industry, where there's such a keen focus on loyalty programs, membership reward programs. And there's a reason for that. It's because they work. These brands rely on predictable traffic, predictable customers. At a hospitality level, they often pay more, stay more for that loyalty. And what an identity graph in one particular use case could do for a company like Dunkin', for example, where they have, I think at last count, somewhere in the neighborhood of 13, 14 million membership rewards programs, Dunkin' loyalty cards. These are, we would think of those as consumer personas for the most part, right? You are getting coffee in your neighborhood or where you frequent, and the ability that an identity graph would provide in terms of crosswalking those personas into their business relevance. What types of companies, what types of verticals are these frequent Dunkin' frequenters coming from? Where are those businesses located? Could you adjust your call to action promotions according to the proximity of those customers to their business location? Could you start to partner at a corporate level, offering Dunkin' Rewards as a employee benefit or employee reward program for certain companies that skew towards your profile of C2B connections within an identity graph? So it just starts to uncover new ideas to explore that companies that, again, are used to having just a ton of traditional B2B data or a ton of traditional consumer data. An identity graph can start to mesh the two and add new insights that weren't there before. So just from a roadmap implementation standpoint, I think our last couple of slides are sort of what it would take to get started. And Kumar, if you want to go ahead and get started on this particular side, and we'll get to the Q&A here in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, yeah. This kind of like it provides a framework, right? First, to audit your data. There are ways we could facilitate that to audit and get clear insight into what data that you have, how much expansion that you could get, what the gaps are, and you'll get a full visibility into the gaps as well as what the possibilities, and then you are able to then enrich and resolve to profile. Once you do that, you can get all the insights that you would want tied to the data, and then like you're able to get the reach into the different channels, and more importantly, as you do that based on the channel and the data that's going to be stitched together, the guardrails, right? That's really important. That's where the privacy part comes into play, where you're going to use certain data set and where you can't, and how you manage the data. So that's kind of like a simple framework. If we want to
and I would say ideally an identity graph can help you do quite a bit of that without having to totally rebuild things on your end, right? The flexibility of that framework is a core attribute of a good identity graph, and that's the goal.
That's a good point I'll highlight. So you're not going to physically move all these data together. It just acts as a bridge. And that's where it's going to facilitate or accelerate the value that you can get.
Okay, great. So I think this might be our third of 4, or this might be the last question. I can't recall. Which of these would make the biggest impact in your organization today? And this is a select all that apply type question. So go ahead and click as many of these as are applicable. Reducing media waste and improving match rates, scaling personalization across channels and devices, creating a single source of truth for customer identity, improving compliance, consent, and governance, or aligning marketing data and tech around shared metrics. Again, thank you for your participation in these polls. Should see the results here momentarily. Okay, pretty good mix. We have more emphasis on things like scaling personalization, no surprise there, and then creating a single source of truth. Wouldn't that be nice? Identity graphs can certainly help pull those things together where they're currently siloed. And from my perspective, from my estimation, they're only going to get better and better as sources improve, as the promise of AI from a development and linkage standpoint start to influence the way these identity graphs are structured. I think those are things that will definitely pop. So just a couple more future-oriented slides here.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak quickly to this, but we'll share this with this deck, and you guys will get access to the recording as well. So these are the traits that you clearly want to look at, right? As you get into this initiative, or you're already along the journey, you want to look into this whole framework to make sure you're looking at the person level identity resolution, right? And the consent line design, that's really key, right? Again, you may have an infrastructure to manage your data set in a privacy compliant way as it is. As you try to bring it together virtually through the graph, you definitely have to make sure you're still compliant with all these privacy compliant requirements. Modular data delivery, basically it helps where you're not boiling the ocean. You are able to get what the insights that what you actually need and get that data so you can actually start to get value. So in phases, and then the capability of modular data delivery, it's key, right? And then enrichment ready profile intelligence, that's also like, so you're able to segment and get the data that you want. Scale, at end of the day, everything that you do, if you don't have enough scale, then the ROI is not going to be there because there's a lot of effort goes into it. So how can you break this into smaller chunks, take it, but at the same time, for those smaller chunks, you get the enough scale to get the results and ROI that you want, right? And governance and visibility, if 6 months goes by, if you don't have clear process in place, that's going to be, obviously then you're going to spend, there's a lot of tech and data debt that you're going to get into. Again, working with a more matured vendor who can actually advise you and guide you along this journey, it's critical.
That's right. And we've actually shared a bit of this concept in previous slides, but I just want to emphasize that, again, identity graphs as a solution should not just be specific to the marketing organization. That may be the tip of the spear from a use case standpoint, but the use cases expand throughout the organization, as well as the responsibilities around privacy. But whether it's your tech team, your analytics, your data scientists, obviously sales and marketing should be hand in hand in terms of the way they utilize and benefit from an identity graph. But this is a non-siloed opportunity for a solution that can work, again, within that flexible framework with all sorts of teams within your organization and should help foster that synergy. So last poll question real quick, and then we'll get into the Q&A. What area is most important for your team in the next 6 to 12 months? Is it choosing the right partner or platform, improving alignment across marketing data and compliance, scaling identity-powered personalization, strengthening governance and consent visibility, or future-proofing our tech and data foundation? I promise I won't ask you any more questions. We will only provide answers in the Q&A after this last poll.
I don't want to lead the witness. I would have selected all, but we'll see.
Okay, great. So it looks like everything other than cross-organization, alignment might be critical. So again, thank you for these answers. We appreciate the input.
And with that, I think we want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to take a moment to thank Chris and Kumar, especially for all your expertise. And thank you to our audience for joining us on this call.